Martial World Teyvat Chapter 35, Fan Fiction by Azazyel. As we flew towards the first location, I decided to try to integrate in conversation with my two new allies in Shenhe and Ganyu. So, I am curious. I've been looking into the neighboring nations. I noticed that the nations seem to be lacking major resources to an almost ludicrous level, honestly. Keqing gave me a look before she hummed and said frankly. That's honestly right, to be honest. Liyue itself has plenty of spiritual materials due to Liyue being one of the major sites of the Celestia War and being where the Heavenly Invader died finally. But we are deeply lacking in more mundane materials that the common people use, and the common people can't use spiritual materials. As Keqing took a breath, Ganyu's soft voice spoke up with some interest in the topic. Liyue is a very mountainous land, and our trees aren't that great for major buildings like Mondstade's thick forests that bear strong wood that can be used for a lot of more mundane things, even with some spiritual wood forming within the forests. However, due to the spiritually rich forests surrounding the mountains within Mondstad, they are severely lacking in all forms of metal as of late. A thrum of the engines filled a brief silence before Shenhe spoke silently as she leaned past me with a hand on my shoulder and pointed at a flock of things in the distant sky. Flesh rotters, do you want to use the ship to exterminate them? I saw in the corner of my eye Keqing grimaced and even shivered in disgust, making me wonder what that was about before I said simply. All right. Shenhe, you see that side seat over there? Go sit in it and push the big red button, then you can use the control rods to control the ship's weapon systems. I felt Shenhe give my shoulder a slight squeeze before she retreated while Keqing muttered with spite. Good, hate those things. I raised an eyebrow and asked with some amusement. What's so bad about them besides being another monster of some kind? Keqing shuddered before she said flatly in a voice devoid of emotion. They are demons actually. They earn their name for although being of tier 1 body cultivators with their bloodline, they are monsters that shit on their victims in their massive flocks of thousands of their fellows, with their toxic feces melting their victims in minutes of being painted in the filth. I couldn't help a matching shudder of fucking disgust at the thought of dying like that, and then a series of soft humming noises rang out as Shenhe activated the anti-air missile, sending a couple of white streams outward that flew outwards, and seeing the size of the flock I said. That should be enough for a second, Shenhe. As the missile flew into the flock, a loud thump hit our ears as even hundreds of meters away the thermobaric vacuum bomb sent out from the large missile went off with a series of explosions that tore through the air and the monsters. They had their inner organs ripped out of their mouths and rectum as the air within their lungs were violently ripped out with so much force. Ganyu gave a slight hum as even the monsters far away from the detonation had their wings crippled and fell dozens of meters to the ground, with Ganyu saying plainly. The flock is reduced even that they will die when the devil bats come out tonight. Let's keep moving on. As we kept flying on, I heard Shenhe's heels hitting the metal floor of the ship until she came up behind me and continued looking out the front window of the ship while I had a thought come to my mind. So what about Inazuma? I know Fontaine has too many monsters, plain and simple. And Sumeru has issues with being out of spiritual materials and also mundane materials due to how much they go through in experimenting with making new things. But I haven't been able to pick up much about those islands. To which Ganyu spoke again, this time with a sigh, saying with some annoyance. The islands of Inazuma are notorious for being insular, to say the least. But as for what resources they seem to be constantly buying or trying to trade for. They are always buying up spiritual rice for martial artists to feed themselves. They even caused some issues when some of our merchants got attacked when they wouldn't sell their load off to them due to just how much they were buying. We needed to set limits on what we sold to them, as the sect of Liyue was getting angry at us for selling all the rice to a foreign nation. So it's possible that Inazuma has a major food shortage perhaps? I wondered before I shrugged and then blinked with a frown crossing my face as I saw that the mountainous territory surrounding my first factory was thoroughly torn apart by what looked like massive lines and paths being carved through the mountains and surroundings. Yelan has been hard at work, I see, Keqing muttered as we came into land on the still thankfully non-completely fucked landing pad where the factory would send off the completed planes and battle mechs. But as I quickly made my way out of the Pelican, I breathed a sigh of relief, seeing the other Pelicans and Titan frames were still in good order, as it seemed that Yelan had made sure to keep combat well away from the site. Well. Look who has finally decided to come back to work. Look at how much work I had to do for you, Jake. Yelan's voice rang out, and then I felt her curvaceous form drape itself over my back, her blowing into my ear making me shiver before she abruptly disappeared as Keqing sparked with lightning as a warning. Yelan appeared a couple of meters away from us as she formed out of solid mist with a hearty chuckle as Keqing asked bluntly, "Who came?" To which Yelan shrugged and said with amusement, "Oh, that old ghost blood Lord Zhao, that older ghost Yin Mei, and that old as-dirt fossil that needs to become an actual ghost and shaman. He, they were in for a rude surprise when I had two of the Yiksha here. I had zero idea who they were, so I asked curiously. So are they dead or something? And did they come to steal or destroy the factory, I assume?" Yelan unfortunately lost her smile before she shook her head and said wryly, "Jake. Old ghosts who cling to life are the most difficult thing in this world to kill. Even harder to kill than actual gods really, as they are so attached to life that they take an obsessive amount of caution in making sure they can escape a bad situation.